Thanks very much, Molly. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. So we're going on a whistle-stop tour of ideas and activities you can do to support your child in relation to their thinking skills and problem solving. There's an opportunity, as Molly said, for you to ask questions at the end. So a starting point for us is to really understand that every single child and young person on the autism spectrum is unique. They will present very differently from each other, but I want to pull out some themes that may help us in thinking about how we can support our children. And a starting point for me is always to go back to the experience of individuals who themselves are autistic. So I'm starting here with some thoughtful ideas from Temple Grandin, a very famous individual on the autism spectrum, who's also an academic. She's a writer, she's a presenter, and is also one of the most successful engineers working in cattle handling systems in America. So Temple has identified 3 different thinking styles, which she thinks are very prevalent in autism. So she describes the visual thinker, the verbal thinker, and the pattern thinker. And as we just drop in and have a look at some of these, think about this in relation to your child. Where do you think they may fall on this list of possible ways of thinking, having a thinking style? And do you think maybe your child is not one of these 3 and has a different thinking style? So the visual thinker, which is very dear to Temple's heart because she describes that as central to her thinking style, is somebody who really sees things visually, thinks visually. They see things in their mind as a way of organizing and understanding the world. Many might have a photographic memory, and Temple says of herself, "My mind is similar to an internet search engine that searches for photographs," but she says she's much faster than the internet. Then she describes the verbal thinker, which is always a surprise because we think somebody who may be struggling around their communication, that verbal thinking wouldn't be their go-to place. But actually I've worked with and met many individuals who very definitely are verbal thinkers. So the verbal thinker is somebody who loves words, they're drawn to it. They like books, they like dictionaries, they like lists, they like timetables, routes, they like stories that are presented in alphabetical order. They may have a huge memory for verbal facts, and some may be very good at learning foreign languages. So that's the verbal thinker. But then there's a group that Temple describes as the pattern thinkers, and these are individuals who may have great strengths in music, in maths, in design, in thinking in patterns. They'll see the relationships between numbers. So just think, where would you place your child, if anywhere, in one of these thinking styles? The challenge with autism is that uniqueness that I said at the beginning, and every single individual on the spectrum is unique to themselves. And I just want to introduce you to somebody called Daniel Tammet, who we might think of as a pattern thinker. Here's a moment exploring that.
So if Daniel is for real, how is he able to do such huge calculations without any conscious effort?
You did this computation in your head. What exactly was going on in your head? What were you doing?
I see an image in my head, and that image starts to change, starts to almost like evolve. It's quite vague at first. As I'm looking at it, it becomes clearer and clearer over a time, and then from that landscape, I can read the digits out.
So it sort of gradually crystallizes.
Yes.
In a multiplication, the 2 numbers hover before him as distinct shapes. The gap in between makes a 3rd shape, which Daniel experiences as a new number. The correct answer.
He's doing math, but he doesn't even know it.
So from that, we can probably assume that Daniel would be a pattern thinker. He can do extraordinary calculations faster and more extensively than a computer. But then I want you to hear him talking about his love of language.
Numbers felt like my first language in a way that English never did. English felt to me like a foreign language. And so being able to recite these numbers like a poem composed in numbers, or story composed in numbers, was for me a way of expressing myself, communicating with other people, and realizing for the first time that I had a gift for communication, which is paradoxical because I'm also on the autistic spectrum. I was born with what we call high functioning autism today, and often people on that spectrum, even on the highest end, find language difficult. It was my case growing up, but it's something that I've learned to master.
He may have started with numbers, but Daniel Tammet also has an intense relationship with words. He speaks several languages, and his new book is part travelogue, part meditation on the subject of how we communicate in all its variety.
So very powerfully there, we can see that Daniel not only is a pattern thinker, but is also a verbal thinker. And his capacity with language is extraordinary. He, as part of a challenge that was set for him, he went to Iceland and learned Icelandic in a week. And at the end of the week was interviewed on the television in Icelandic. Now, the point I'm trying to make is not that all of our children will have the kind of gifts that Daniel will have, but the fact that you have one kind of thinking style doesn't mean you don't have another kind of thinking style. And part of what we're going to look at today is different ways of building on these different potential thinking styles, which may in fact come together to be more than one particular style. What we do know when we look at autistic thinking is this whole idea of what's called systemizing. And I'm just introducing this because we're going to look at how we can use systems to support our children with their thinking. Baron Cohen, in some research that he did, focused on the fact that our children have the capacity to focus on the physical world in greater depth than is typical, noticing small details that others miss, such as patterns in numbers or shapes, and attending to highly specific topics in order to understand them completely. You may have come across that in your daughter or your son on the spectrum, that they can become real specialists in a particular area of interest to them. And that systemizing comes in different versions, but here we've got some of the key elements. I'm not going to go through all of these, but just these are for you to, when you get the recording, you can come back and look at these in a more leisurely way. But know that in autism, there seems to be a real impulse, a real drive to work out how things work, how they fit together, what are the rules that create the system that they're seeing. And that's particularly strong in areas, you may have come across this, you know, a child who's incredibly capable at understanding and using the TV remote or computer systems, or fascinated by machines or some aspects of mathematics. How do we understand that is something else. Josh Muggleton is an autistic adult who's a psychologist, and this is something that he has said. He talks about how frightening the world is, and when you don't understand how how the rest of us seem to communicate without words, we cannot understand your social rules and body language. To you, the world is safe and generally predictable. We are always at a disadvantage. For us, everything is more unexpected and random. But this bit in blue is a really important thing. In our specialist subjects, we are the experts. We can gradually build our knowledge, finding out each detail and working out how it all fits together. We can draw up lists, compare and classify, uncover the rules and the exceptions to the rules. It's satisfying to feel that there is one area of life we have completely mastered. So that is something that we can draw on in supporting our children with their thinking and their problem solving. So what are things that we can do that really develop this drive towards systemizing? We can provide information that is ordered and logical. All those things you might already be doing, schedules, to-do lists, charts, and build on that by using visual, pattern-based, sometimes verbal systems such as mind mapping or color coding or flow diagrams. You can add to this list, and we're going to look at some ways we could go about doing this in the home. So just think about all of the things that happen in your home that your child could actually participate in, that's going to build on this kind of organizational, systemizing way of being. From helping pair socks to organizing things that always are going to go in the same place in the cutlery drawer, how we organize books or CDs, if you still have them in your homes, on a shelf, how we organize the fridge, how can we engage the child in supporting you in doing some of these activities that are going to build on their strengths. You can think about creating visual maps that your child can follow as they're building up their skills in relations to this, and we'll have a look at some examples of that in a moment. And once you have encouraged your child to engage in activities that require some thought from them, you know, pairing the socks in color, in shape, in size, making sure that the knives and forks and spoons go in the right place in the cutlery drawer, helping with organizing the fridge, for example. Start to build up sequences and organizational systems so they can do these things, and then a long way down the line, you can start to think about, is there another way we could do this? And see if your child can come up with some other solutions that are different from what you've been doing so far. So think about creating predictable, initially predictable organization systems, which is going to help your child to organize themselves. So can you think of ways of storing things so your child can be responsible for putting things away, for example? So we've got an example there of a box which has got certain types of activities in it that the child can play, your child can place in there. The bottom right there, you've got, you know, a Ziploc bag where certain things can go. So you're starting to organize your environment and your child is participating in that. On the road to doing that, there are some visual systems you can use to help. So that photo at the bottom on the right there, that's from a classroom, but you can see the principle here that everything has a place and there's a place for everything. And the child is guided towards what goes where by using photographs of the actual item. And then they're going to place the item next to the photograph. Think about how you might be able to do that, for example, in a chest of drawers with clothing. On the left there, you've got an example of a place setting on a mat to help the child organize knife, fork, spoon, plate, where it goes. So that's like a kind of map that you can use. Think about different situations where you could use something like that to help your child start to make sense of and organize their environment for themselves. I'm not going to stay long on this slide, but just want to remind you from the diagnosis that we know that there is a challenge that comes from a very fundamental part of the diagnosis, which is around the relationship to coping with change. And what we might see at the most extreme point is a child who is very preoccupied with rituals and doing things a particular way, moving down to or up to somebody who that's only occasionally the case. Now, the thing to know is that preoccupation, the need to do things the same way, the resistance to change, the need for consistency is a moving feast for our children and can often be an indicator of how anxious they're feeling. So somebody who's normally at the bottom of this slide, only very occasionally driven in this way, may become very overwhelmed and need to do things in a very ritualistic fashion. We need to hold on to that possibility because we don't want our children we don't want to play into something that's going to make their lives more difficult for them. But notice what I put in red at the bottom there. You know, from the diagnostic criteria, they talk about how these kind of repetitive behaviours can create interference. My question would be, what exactly is it interfering with? And do we need to rethink that a little bit? But one of the things that this leads us to is the idea that we need to start to build some flexibility. So yes, we build on those systemizing strengths. We might introduce some routines that are part of everyday life at home, but then in time and very carefully, we're going to introduce the unexpected, the surprise, the fact that it's not always one way. Sometimes there's more than one answer, more than one way of doing things, which can be very challenging for our children, but essential to their eventual capacity for problem solving. So you may have all sorts of to-do lists, which may look something like this, or it may look very different. So first we'll do this, then this, then this, and they can see what's going to unfold before them. And so you might use timetables or schedules or to-do lists for your child. You can use sequence prompts where you actually guide them through an activity, showing them what they do first, second, third, and fourth to complete an activity and gain independence. You can start to use visual or pattern cues to help them understand that sometimes the same piece of furniture may be used for different things. So the table where we eat our meals together can also be the place where you do a puzzle, or it may be the place where you do some drawing. And one of the ways for those who need it that you can signal that shift is by using different of table coverings, just to let them know when it's this table cover, table can use visual prompts. These are a mixture of photographic prompts, symbol prompts, and word prompts. You can create a prompt like this using the level of communication that's going to work for your child. So just letting them know when you're getting organized, these are the things you need to gather together. Think about how you create boundaries. Sometimes you might have a child who wants to take over the whole house with their Lego, for example. So look at how you might use a tray. Another form of boundaries that you can use to show them where they can do the activity is something like masking tape, which doesn't cost much money. Sorry, there's just a sign there about the internet connection. I hope you're all able to hear. You might use a masking tape, which is cheap to buy, and you can then just mask out with the tape, you know, the edges for where an activity can take place. We also need to support our children in making choices themselves and communicating their choices. Think about how you can use drawings or photographs or words, or both, or all, so that they can communicate to you the choices that they're making. And build independence. Build, this whole section is really looking at how you start off by giving the information, practicing it in a particular way, and then slowly you move it to them to take responsibility. So here's just an example of, for a painting activity at the beginning, you may show your child, these are all the things that you're going to need to do this painting, or something like this. And so they go through each of these activities, you collect all of these things, and they just check that that's what's available to them. But then in time, having done that, you start to move to a point where they organize it for themselves. I want to do painting. What do I need? I'm going to need my apron. I'm going to need the pots, and so on. So they then collect together visually like this what they're going to need, and then they go and get the actual items. For an older child, here's another version of a very similar thing. So here we've got a homework planner. Some of our children get very stressed about when they're given, I'm here talking about a secondary setting, but get very stressed about when they're given the work and when it's due to be handed in, and how they're going to organise their time. This kind of visual mapping, if the math homework is given on Monday, but it has to be in on Friday, do you need to do that before the English, which was given on the same day, but is due on Wednesday? Using this kind of mapping plan with your child, they can see actually English is due in before maths or geography. So I need to do the English first. At some point, when you feel your child is really well established with the routines and ideas that you've introduced at home, start to bring in that possibility of a change. So something that's not going to happen in quite the order that we might expect, or you've got a timetable or a schedule that they're working to, where you introduce that unexpected event. And depending on your child, you may have different kinds of ways of passing that message across. So on your schedule, you'll have the unknown thing is a surprise, and you can use words like surprise, you can use question mark, you can have another colour or picture that represents we don't know yet what's going to happen, and that TBA is to be announced if you have a very verbal child who would like that kind of language. All of this is pushing and pushing towards the idea that we're trying to increase that flexibility, having got a expectation in place in terms of following the schedule. How are we going to cope with something being different? And a really helpful thing to do with your child is to understand that you can do the same thing in more than one way. So on Monday, you might be stacking the dishwasher using method 1, but on Tuesday, you're going to use method 2. And then on Friday, your child can choose, are they going to use method 1 or method 2? We don't have time today to go through it, but there's a link there to Carol Gray's Social Stories site, which is well worth a visit in terms of helping you think about how you can prepare your child and support them around using more than one approach. As your child is becoming more independent, making decisions for themselves, there will be times when they're stuck. Introduce the idea of a help card, something that they can show you or a word that they can say to let you know that they're struggling right now and they need some support. This is quite a nice system that you can use, which is a two-sided card. That on one side says, I'm okay, I can carry on, I know what I'm doing, and then the other side is letting you know, I need help. Sometimes it's not always easy for our children to say this, but they may be able to show you using a card. So I'm still building now on this idea of expression and flexibility, and I just want to show you a few examples of how you might go about this. Be cautious with this if you have somebody who would be very upset by the idea that what people say may sound different from what they actually mean. A useful starting point is those figures of speech, things that people say, idioms, and think about how you could actually teach the meanings of those things that people say, recognize them, and then some ways of dealing with it. So this is just a homemade one that I have used a lot, where I've taken a phrase, and I really don't know why I keep this one. You know, it's raining cats and dogs. I think the only time I've ever said that is when I've been teaching idioms. So think of ones that are relevant to your child, and get them to describe. So what you see here is the idea of a sheet where we've got the phrase at the top, it's raining cats and dogs, and then get them to say what they think it means. So that's what that first picture is, of cats and dogs falling out of the sky, which might be a very literal understanding of those words. Although I do have to say that one young person that I worked with had a very different understanding of this, and the picture he drew was of a cat and a dog sitting next to each other and somebody leaning over and saying to them, "It's raining cats and dogs," which was a new way of thinking about those words. But then talking about, what does it really mean? It's raining very heavily, there's lots of rain coming down, and then get your child to draw a picture of that. There are plenty of things you can buy to help you with this. This is just one example. This What Did You Say, What Did You Mean book by Jude Welton, and that's an example of how she approaches it within the book. But there are many versions of this. We can't learn every single idiom that there is in the world. So one of the things that's really important is to help our children just recognize when it's one of those strange things that people sometimes say, and ask for explanation, to hear it, and if you don't know what it means, ask for what it means. I once gave a talk with where there were most of the people in the group were themselves on the autism spectrum, and we talked about idioms and phrases and the way people say things, and one of the participants came up to me and said that she was a very high-flying executive, and she'd been to a team meeting where one of the speakers had talked about there's more than one way to skin a cat, and she'd never heard that phrase before, and she said she was so horrified at the picture that created in her head that she could no longer listen to what they were talking about because she was so preoccupied with this image. And she said it took her about 20 minutes to work out what it probably meant. But then when she came back to listen to the speaker, they were 20 minutes further on down the line, and she'd missed all of that information. So one of the things we might want to teach our children is to recognize that it's something that people say, maybe make a note of it, and then leave it so that you can listen to what else is being said. One of the more fun ways of working through this, developing flexibility in responses and thinking, is to use humour. And one of the important things to think about is that humour develops in a particular way in the autistic child. Sometimes it follows a kind of pattern of, it starts off with physical humour, so people falling over or sitting down when there isn't a chair, those sorts of types of humour. For some, particularly the verbal thinkers, there's a love of puns, and for some it's things that don't quite belong together. And we can surprisingly use humour to help when our child is distressed. You know, a lot of the research, sorry, a lot of the diagnostic criteria would suggest that our children do not have a sense of humour. That's not been my experience. And I just want to tell you about Jonathan, who I worked with. He was a boy who loved words, very verbal. His dictionary was his favourite book, but he didn't understand jokes. And if people laughed, it made him very distressed, and would ask, you know, why are they doing that? Why are they saying that? We explained that it was because people were laughing because they thought something was funny. He said, well, teach me, why is it funny? So he wanted to learn about jokes, and this was back a long time ago. I don't know if you remember, there was an advert for cat's food, Whiskers, and the legend went, why do cats, 9 out of 10 cats prefer Whiskers, which was the name of the cat food. So we found a card that actually, for his birthday, which had on the front, why don't cats shave? And inside it said, because 9 out of 10 prefer Whiskers. And the staff all dutifully laughed around him, and he said, why are you laughing? And we had to explain. And that led to months of breaking down every single joke. I can't tell you how unfunny jokes come when you have to keep explaining them, but we stuck with it. And the moment we realized that it had worked for him was when he said, he came to me, and this was a very familiar kind of conversation. What do you call it when you've got one person playing on a piano? I said, do you mean like a solo? Is that, yes, that's what he meant. What about 2? What about 3? And he kept going, and he got to 7. What do you call it when there's 7 people playing on the piano? And I was thinking, I'm at the limit of my knowledge. We're going to have to look this up. And he said, no, you can't call it anything because they won't all fit on. That was his first ever joke, and he went from strength to strength with it. And alongside this introduction of humour was an increase in his ability to be flexible. So think about, you know, can you, if it's right for your child, can you start looking at joke books together? Can you look at the kind of jokes that appeal to your child? Have you got somebody who likes something that's a bit of a pun or a bit incongruous? Do they like something that makes absolutely no sense at all, but is a very kind of surreal kind of humour? Think about creating joke books together. Look at the work of James Campbell, who does work on how to support children to become stand-up comics. If you've got a child who's very into physical humour, things like Mr. Bean will be appealing. We need to start building on that to think about how we can see things more than one way. So look at the kind of things that might appeal to your child. If you've got a child who loves any of these quizzes, you know, on television, Mastermind, Countdown, Millionaire, whatever, think about using that kind of quiz format with your child, and then give them these kind of challenges. So you can use an actual chair, or you can use a picture of a chair. What can you do with a chair? How many different uses can you think of for a chair? Not just for sitting in, what else could you do with it? And you can introduce any kind of objects. This is one that could be done as a written activity, or they could you could write in for them, or you could just do it in the quiz format. So what different things can you do with a flower pot? What can you do with a bag? You know, could it be a hat? Could it be a shoe? Could it be, and get them to create unlikely, imaginative responses. At the beginning, they may think of just one other use other than wearing flip-flops on your feet. With time, they might be able to become very fanciful in their thinking. Could you wear them as a pair of earrings, for example?
Just to let you know, Annie, we've got 15 minutes until the Q&A.
Oh no, okay, right. So come at it another way as well. So rather than looking for an answer, ask them, what's the question? This is the answer. What's the question? Making comparisons is a very strong way of working. Finding, so looking how things are alike, how things are different, how you can rank and prioritize things. We're going to look at some examples of this. So you might be familiar of these sorts of activities. You know, some of our children will be stunningly good at this. You know, what's the difference between picture 1 and picture 2, and finding all the differences. I find these photographic versions work very well. You can create some, you can get your child to create some scenarios. What's the difference between photograph 1? What's the difference with photograph 2? What's missing? Still with this idea of making comparisons, looking between one thing and another, start to introduce the idea of ranking, something that is the very best, something that's the very worst, and something that's in the middle. There are different ranking systems you can use. This is a ranking pyramid. What's at the top is the best or good or yes, and then as you come down, less and less and less so until you're at the bottom. You can do this using post-it notes, or you can use it doing photographs of things that are important to your child. Diamond 9 is similar but very challenging, because you can see you've got one very good and one very bad at the bottom, and then different levels of choices in between. I just want to show you how I went about this with somebody I worked with. So I gave him a camera. You could use a phone, some electronic version of capturing images, and asked him to take pictures of photographs of what was important in his school. At the bottom is what he actually said. So he took the main school hall, which he said was where important things happened in the school. He liked the classrooms because he said there are many seats and the display work is good. He liked notice boards in the corridor, letting him know what was going to be happening in the future. He liked the field outside of the sports field in front of the school, and he liked the main corridor in the as he came into the building. So he did those photographs. He told me why they were important to him, but then he had to rank them. What's most important? What's next? What's next? What's next? What's least important? And that immediately gives us more insight into his thinking. You can use something very similar using a ranking system to think about problems that the child may face and reflect on them. So what's the size of the problem? Is it a number 1? Is it tiny at the bottom there, like dropping my pencil? Or is it all the way up to number 5, which is huge, like losing my bus pass? And you can start to, you could come at this another way. Here, using post-it notes of different sizes and colours, having big problems, medium problems, and small problems. But over on the matching colour and size, think about a solution. So a big problem, someone hurt me. What could be a solution? Tell a safe adult. So you've got a list of people it's safe to talk to about it, and come up with an alternative. So we're now moving to the idea of either it could be this or it could be that. So you have a situation with your child. For example, my mum had to put the crisps back on the supermarket shelf. Why was that the case? It could be either because she didn't have enough money to pay for them, or what could be another reason, and that would go into the second box. You may have more than the 2 options. This is a real one that I did in a school setting when we had a fire engine and some firefighters coming to visit the school. And you know, for some, their anxiety was that it was there because the school was on fire. It could have been that, but actually it was because they were coming to show us the fire engine and talk to us. Think about how you can build on your child's special interests. I'll let you come back to some of these quotes when is another autistic adult. But here we need to start thinking about the main idea. What's a main point? What is it that we need to pay attention to? Not always easy for our children because they may be drawn to a detail that's not relevant. Ideas of how you can go about that there, but I just want to show you some examples. So presenting your child with a situation where they've got to make sense of what they're seeing. So in that first picture on the left, something's missing. What is it? So they may be able to spot that one of those cartons doesn't have a straw. So what would be the solution? Find a straw or open it and put it into a glass. So you've got two possibilities. And that second one, you're going to do some painting. What's missing? There's no brush. Is that the only thing that's missing? Maybe there's water missing, maybe there's paper missing, and so on. So they're starting now to think about solutions. Remember those games that you might have done as a child yourself, where you have a tray and you get a chance to look at what's in the tray, then you cover it up, and then you take something away, and you have to find what's missing. That's a game you can start with 1 or 2 objects and move on to maybe 20 objects in a tray. Sometimes it's about presenting a situation and getting them to work out what's happening here. What are we going to do when you see all these things together? There are many activities you can have a look at, things that you can do following instructions. And then this final thing for us to look at together is a very organized way of teaching problem solving. Lego therapy, which you can do at home, and I've got some references for you of things you can get to help you with that. But the important thing to know about this is that in Lego therapy, you create buildings or create models in a group. So that a group of 3 people, your child plus 2 others, which could be 2 other children, or it could be a child and an adult, but there is a separate adult who is there to oversee what's happening, and I'll explain their role in a moment. But those 3 individuals who are going to be doing the building have designated roles. You have an engineer, and their job is to read the instructions. When I say read, it might be to follow picture instructions. They're going to tell the others what they have to do, and they start by telling the supplier what they need to find. So they need to find certain type of brick, certain type of colour, and they give those items to the builder, and the builder's job is to build the model. This I'm sure you can imagine already, this can create all sorts of issues, but the idea is that the child and the children together will do the problem solving if any issues arise. So it might be that they're doing a kind of free building, but we're focusing on the collaborative building with your group of 3, the engineer, the supplier, and the builder. If you don't have 3, you can have a supplier and an engineer together, and then the builder. So they have different roles within the task. There are different ways of letting each other know what bricks are needed, and these are some of the resources you can use, but I want to take you to an example of a group of children, more than one group of children, actually engaged in Lego therapy.
In the Lego group, the main aim is the social skills group. But the beauty of it is that we can work on so many different skills. So we can work on language skills because they're giving instructions and following instructions. We can work on fine motor skills because they're having to manipulate the different blocks. Work on problem solving. There's lots of problems that they come across in Lego group. And again, the social skills, because they're really working together in an activity that they normally would be playing with by themselves.
Well, first I was the engineer, and the engineer is the person that tells who's the supplier what to do. And as the supplier gets the things for the builder, and the builder puts the things together, and then we have a bit of a break time, and then we switch some roles.
I think some of the biggest improvements I've seen in the kids that come along to Lego Group is their ability to problem solve, because for a lot of these children, they're usually playing Lego by themselves, and they're really good at it, but they have to wait a lot. They have to describe what they want each other to do, and so that can get really frustrating, and we've had some big arguments, but by the end of the term, we've really seen them come along and be able to wait a lot more and problem solve together.
With our little boy, I think this group's been amazing, because in his normal social groups at school and at home, other kids that are maybe mainstream make allowances for when he's really snatchy or demanding his way, whereas here I know that all the kids are kind of in the same boat, so they have to learn strategies to cope with each other.
I've been making a sort of helicopter fire engine machine thing. We finished the helicopter. It was really red, and at the end I was a builder, and I spun the propeller around and around, and it was awesome.
It doesn't just have to be Lego. Think about how you could use those principles. Your role as the adult is, if there is an issue, that instead of resolving it, you actually give it back to your child. So how can we sort that out? What can we do? What went wrong? What needs to happen differently? But think about how you could take those principles of having roles and responsibilities within a task for other things that you could be doing at home. I'm going to end on this one and just say, think about some of these ideas, and remember that the important thing will be to make the skills that your child has used, so give them words, let them know you sorted that out by doing this. So feed back to them what they did well, what they chose to do, how it helped, and how they could use that in other situations. In your packs, there are, I'm not going to go through them, but you'll see there are some developmental ideas to help you think about problem solving, and a final section really on different types of thinking skills, starting with number 1, which our children may be very good at, moving through to more higher level thinking skills, and how you might apply that practically. When you get the recording, you'll have a chance to look at those in some detail. And thank you all very much for listening, and I look forward to your questions.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much, Annie. We've actually had lots of questions coming in, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. First one is from Mark. This is, how do we deal with rigid thinking? My teenage daughter will have a plan for the day, but struggles with unexpected change and readjusting.
Brilliant, and that really takes us back to that idea that we started with, really, of she'll have a plan, it may change, and it's about introducing that possibility of change and how you can do things slightly differently. So any of those activities which you can practice in a safe situation. So actually say, okay, this is our plan for the day, but let's build in a surprise. And one child I worked with who absolutely hated change, we used to use, he chose a red exclamation mark on a card to go sort of into the planning. So at this point, there's going to be something unexpected. And at the beginning, that had to be quite early on in the plan so that it was out of the way. But slowly build that. Many of the ideas we looked at today will support that flexibility. Think about humour, think about doing things, planning to have more than one way of doing things, for example.
Great, thank you. Next one's from Melissa. My 13-year-old really struggles with organisation and putting things away. She likes to arrange her bedroom to decorate it, but can never finish doing it. I have given her storage for certain things, but she refuses to use it and puts things in places that don't make sense. How can I help her to be more organised and tidy?
I'm throwing out these possibilities. They may or may not be helpful to you, but I wonder if she might find it helpful to have a kind of map system. So you, as well as having all of the storage, which sounds great, the things that you found for her, to actually have a plan with her where those things could go, and have a map system. So she's got a map she can follow and look at that and say, oh, this box goes over here. You could try that idea of having a matching photograph so that it goes next to or on top of the matching photograph, for example. But I think an interesting starting point would be to work with her, for her to explain why she's putting things where she's putting them, because there may be some logic makes sense to her, but not to you. But maybe that would be worth exploring with her.
That's great, thanks Annie. Next one's from Jenny. Is there a danger that by introducing more of these routines and patterns that it will make them more reliant on these wet systems and cause problems when going to school/relatives? Current diagnosis is for high functioning ASD.
Absolutely. And that's something we touched on at the beginning, that there is that drive for the predictable, the routine, the ritual. And if that's all we offer, then it becomes very scary. You know, like one of the questions we've just had, that not being able then to cope with change. So it's about having those routines as a starting point and then building on them. But the timing of that is quite delicate. You need to be in a place where you know that your child feels safe and not anxious and is willing to take that risk. So absolutely agree. We need those structures to start off with, and then we need to very gently and carefully build the possibility of things changing and the world still being a safe place.
That's great, thank you. Next one is from Casey. My child gets very hung up when something in his opinion doesn't make sense. Most of the time he is correct, it doesn't make sense. Most recent example, he's doing his 11+ practice papers. If he comes across a question he thinks doesn't make sense or is a silly question to ask, he becomes very upset and is unable to move on from that. He becomes fixated on it not making sense. How can I help him with this?
That's very challenging and very common. I think for me that I might introduce another routine so that when you come across a question that doesn't make sense, the routine that's introduced is that goes kind of, I don't know, in a notebook or on a post-it note, or it goes in a box that I will come back to that at the end. So it has to be parked. It has to go to one side, finish the other questions, and then come back to the one that doesn't make sense. He needs to practice that at home before trying to do it during a practice paper or in the actual paper. And what's really important here is he needs to be acknowledged for identifying that it doesn't make sense. But knowing that actually there is a way that it makes sense, but it takes time to work it out together. So that's something you just have to put to one side and answer the other questions. And it may be that you never answer the question that doesn't make sense because you're focusing on the others. That's better than getting stuck on the one that doesn't make sense and not moving on.
That's great, thank you, Annie. Next question is from Jennifer. I have a little girl who really struggles with rigidity of thought and requires routine and week schedules. At home, this causes a lot of friction because her younger brother is also autistic, but with PDA traits, so it requires a lot of flexibility and choice. How could I help her to understand and be more flexible towards her brother when she finds change to schedule so overwhelming?
Wow. That's a lot that you're trying to juggle there. I wonder if that introducing the more than one way of doing something might help her. So you could do it like this, but also having a possible, you know, that surprise card, the unexpected, and having a routine around what to do when things don't happen the way you think they're going to. Certainly, social stories, have a look at Carol Gray's website if you're not familiar with them, would be a great way of helping her to cope with those unexpected changes in routines. And having perhaps some time when she knows it's kind of sacred, that this is a very important thing we've decided to do today, and it will happen if that's possible to arrange.
Great, thank you. Next one from
to everybody. I'm sorry, these are probably very unsatisfactory responses because I'm having to give you quick, immediate things, and it would be great if I could just sit and talk with you individually to have all the details and we could plan something a bit more.
Oh, if only we had the time. Next one's from Stephanie. I'm a neurodivergent individual myself, diagnosed with both ADHD and ASD. I'm also a mother to 3 young daughters aged 14, 9 and 6 who are also a mix of ADHD and ASD. All 3 of my girls are very different and vary completely. They all struggle greatly with executive functions, being organised, initiating tasks, etc. They have all shown resistance to visual timetables, emotional and emotions cards. Are there any other strategies that could support them all?
Well, tell me the name of the person.
It was Stephanie. Stephanie.
Yeah. Stephanie, thank you for that. Do you know some of the best responders to their autistic children have been in families where there is a real understanding of that? And you may be familiar with people like Purple Ella, who has a website, a Facebook page, and others who do such a skillful job of supporting their children because they're coming from that lived experience. So the first thing I would say to you is you're probably in a much better position to answer that than I am. And I think perhaps a place to go would be getting each of your children to tell you what works for them on their own, what works for them together as a family, and build on that. I would certainly look at finding activities that you can perhaps do together that allow some problem solving. So it could be something like Lego therapy. You happen to have 3, so that's perfect. But it could be cooking, it could be gardening, it could be creating something together. I very much understand that for some, the whole idea of schedules is just horrifying and counterproductive. So you might have some very creative individuals who can tell you and work out between themselves what would work for them as something you could do together as a family. And if schedules are a point of resistance, don't use them. Don't use them. Find the thing that is going to work for them, and it might be that they like surprises, they like the unexpected, and to follow that path. Sometimes I'm trying to remember the name. There's an American woman who's a parent to 3 children. She's written a book about her experience. I can't quite remember her name at the moment, but she talks about how she herself is autistic. Her 3 children are autistic, and she does a lot of things that she knows would work for her. So decompressing when they get home, you know, they'll all go out in the garden and spend time on the swings or the trampoline long before they're going to do anything else. So I would follow your instincts.